Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hi everyone, and welcome to Room by Room, the home organisation Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with expert knowledge from professionals in the field. I'm your host, Gabriella Joustra, coming to you from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's get started. Today I'm joined by Tania Reid from For the Crowded House to talk about hoarding. Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Before we get started, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Tania. I've been working in the community sector for about 30 years or so. I started my own business called For the Crowded House in 2013. At the time I was working in a community health service, and it was we were getting quite a few people who we thought without a diagnosis were showing hoarding behaviours. And I was kind of really interested. I met my first person with hoarding disorder and I thought, this is amazing and horrible, and these things, this stuff is kind of completely controlling their lives. And also there wasn't many people doing that at the time, so I left that job and I started For the Crowded House. For the first couple of years I had part-time jobs, but now I'm lucky enough that I do it full-time and I've got a part-timer as well. So,
and what does For the Crowded House do specifically?
So we work with people predominantly with hoarding disorder. We also work with people who might have clutter and feel completely overwhelmed. And I think, that's kind of all of us on some days. Do you know what I mean? We also do some work with people who've got OCD. Usually, I don't know if I could think of somebody who hasn't had a significant trauma or intergenerational hoarding. So hoarding, there's a genetic link as well. So people who grow up in hoarded homes generally, so that, they've got that nature and nurture kind of going against them really. So they're at a higher risk then of also developing hoarding disorder themselves. So we work in most of Melbourne, work with people in their own homes now that NDIS is kind of taken over the world. Most of our people that we work with are on the NDIS. Sometimes I do work with service like Child Protection will approach me and say they've got a home in which the children are at risk of being removed because of the amount of items in the home. Also do trainings occasionally, and mostly also doing a bit of kind of secondary consultation. So because there isn't a lot known about hoarding, when there's a team of professionals, there'll be an OT and a support coordinator and support workers. Some people are really worried that we can't touch anything because that will upset the person, or things like that. And so we also follow kind of fire brigade recommendations. So some of that secondary consultation is about going in and meeting the person, seeing the home environment, what do they want, what are the carers, the OTs, everybody kind of doing, and bring that together in a best practice safety perspective. Because people who live in hoarded homes are extraordinarily much more likely to die if there's a fire.
I've only mostly seen TV shows where you see the stacks of newspaper and things like that, I guess, or even just not being able to leave the room easily. Is that sort of what causes that?
Yeah, so most fires start at night. So Fire Rescue Victoria, which used to be called the MFB, I think are one of the world leaders in terms of researching how the effect of hoarding on people's homes. What happens when there's a fire is most of us, whether it's hoarded home or not, the smoke is what kills us. It's not the actual flame. So you can imagine that if a room's already kind of half full or 3/4 full and you're in that room, it's going to fill up with smoke a lot quicker. It's also about the toxicity of the things that are burning, because if you've got more items in the room, more toxins get released when it burns, stacks of things falling over. And not having kind of clear pathways. I'm working with an older woman at the moment, and I'm trying to get her to leave her security door not deadlocked. Because if there's a fire and she can't get to the key, she can't get out. But she's very precious about her belongings. And she's worried someone's going to come in and steal them, so she wants to keep all her doors locked.
Yeah, there's definitely, even in my own home, we have a deadbolt, and I initially was locking it because I was like, safety, you've got to be safe.
Yeah.
Can't have people coming in the house. And then I was like, if there's a fire, I'm not going to be able to find my key. And I'm either going to jump off the balcony or I'm going to be at the door unable to get out.
And even sometimes people go, oh, it's okay because I'm leaving the key in the lock. Okay, so if you grab the key and then you drop the key.
Oh, yeah.
You can't find it again, and a room fills up with smoke usually within 3 minutes.
Wow, that quick.
So that's assuming that you've even gotten to an exit. So a lot of the work that I do is that safety stuff around existing smoke detectors, widening pathways, so that if the worst does happen, they stand much more of a chance.
Interesting. We're going to do a little bit more introduction of you, if that's okay. And then this topic's very interesting, so I'm very eager to get into it. But first, we'll just introduce you a little bit more. So it's a little section we call Have You Met Tania? What sort of things do you find relaxing?
I find pulling weeds.
Sounds terrible to me.
No. Because my work, it's so serious, and you can't do things quickly, unlike those TV shows. There's not much kind of instant gratification, and we all like that buzz when you buy something and you feel great for a couple of minutes and then it kind of goes away. Whereas pulling weeds, and because I love my garden as well, and I'm a volunteer in the local friends group at the local creek, it's such instant, and then there's goodness. Like, you've done really good within like 15 minutes or an hour or whatever it is, and it's making the planet healthier. So and it feels really good, particularly those grasses where it's got a really, or maybe you don't, those grasses which have got a really long long root system.
Yeah.
And you pull it out and it's like, oh, that's such a good feeling.
It's like, one of those satisfaction videos where if you cut it off too early, it's not as nice as if you pull the whole thing out.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that's kind of relaxing. Do yoga, walk my dog. Watercolour. I've picked up watercolour recently,
nice.
Which is an interesting creative. And I'd always avoided it up until this age because I thought it's so kind of out of control because it just kind of goes everywhere. But I'm learning to embrace that bit.
Yeah, I've... as a kid, my dad bought me some watercolours and he didn't teach me how to use them. So I used them like acrylics. Did not work. But yeah, I find it very interesting. So it's great to hear that you're learning something new and
Yes.
yeah, trying something a bit out of your comfort zone, I guess.
Yes, and that's also why I'm here today.
Yeah,
It's
great.
good for our brains to hop out of our comfort zone. And, you know, it's also, I also think like people are letting me or like a stranger into their home. Like that's really confronting. There's a whole lot of stigma around hoarding as well. They're hopping out of their comfort zone. You know, we need to be equally respectful and remember what we're doing and to kind of challenge ourselves as well. We can't just expect other people to do it.
And I guess it keeps you aware of how they're feeling. You know, if you push your comfort zone, then you know how your clients are feeling because you felt that yesterday.
A lot of people don't sleep the night before I come.
Really?
Because they're so nervous. What am I going to do? I had someone, poor woman, and she said to me, oh, I thought you'd rock up with a truck. I'm like, oh, you poor thing. I don't know how you even agreed. Like, because I've seen those TV shows where you rock up with a truck and you don't have any power or autonomy. Everything just gets thrown out and then everybody celebrates because the problem's fixed. Oops. It's not like that at all.
What's a movie you've seen recently?
I haven't been to the movies.
What about a TV show?
No.
Nope.
Can't think of anything intelligent to say.
What about a podcast? Have you listened to any recently? Or do you have a favourite?
I do like We Can Do Hard Things by Glennon Doyle and her wife, Abby. It's a lovely mixture of fun and gritty, good content about all sorts of things, relationships, childhood, society in general. Yeah, I like their humour as well.
Is there a course you've done recently that you've really enjoyed?
Wow, talking about out of my comfort zone, I decided I'm doing pottery, so on the wheel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's freaky. It's interesting, particularly trying to learn a new skill. It's very good for your brain again. And then it's amazing, like this thing that looks like a proper cup or something just emerges out of your hands. And I've only done it like for one term, so I'm really novice. But just that lovely sense of achievement. And it's so difficult. It looks so easy. So easy. But yeah, good to do something with my hands again.
Yeah, I've definitely seen, it looks so satisfying on like videos, but I'm like, it must be so much harder.
It's so much harder than it looks.
Yeah, I'd love to try that. It's great that you're, learning how to do lots of new things. And yeah, do you have any cups that you, like, have you made anything that you use at home now?
Yes, so I've got it would be called a little cup with no handle. So I'm currently using it kind of as a vase, and it's sweet because then, you know, it goes through the glazing process and you're not sure if it's going to survive because of you. But it's nice. It's good.
Lovely. So how do you define home organisation?
I guess having everything roughly in its place. You know, it can be easy to say, oh, everything in its place and a place for everything. And I guess it has to be functional for the people or person who's living there or the animals as well. And the home can still be used for its intended purpose. Because lots of people with hoarding disorder, they would say their house is organised. Like sometimes I work with people with hoarding disorder and they've got everything in tubs. Every tub is labelled. So they would say their home is organised. Yes, it's a subjective thing.
Okay, interesting. And why do you say roughly in its place rather than in its place?
Then that's kind of like perfection. You know, and if you're not the only person living there, there's always things that are going to be moved or lost or broken or replicas or,
Yeah. Or just the shoes are in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you're just having a bad day and you couldn't be bothered. Like, that's okay too. Like, my house doesn't look like a display home. I mean, it's not hoarded, but, roughly.
That's interesting because, I feel like when we talk about, so this podcast is about home organization. So we think that home organization is everything perfect in boxes. And I guess what you're saying is that hoarding, you can have the boxes, you can have everything in place, but it's not necessarily what's going to work for the house.
No, I mean, maybe they've stopped having friends over because their children are too embarrassed. Maybe they've had the electricity cut off. Like, I remember meeting a solicitor once and he said to me, I've arranged to meet you because I don't want to go through another winter without heating. And he owned this really rich, kind of fabulous house, but he was so embarrassed. So he didn't want to get like a plumber or whatever, to come over and fix it.
So he just went without heating?
Yeah. Because the shame and the embarrassment was much stronger than that want for heating.
And I guess at one point it became the desire for heating overcame the shame, I guess, or maybe the shame decreased.
Well, I don't know. He ended up cancelling me. So I think that the shame kind of overrode that as well. And I think maybe because he was a solicitor, he had extra shame because, professional people aren't meant to have mental illness.
Yeah. And what do you think people get wrong with home organisation?
I think they have too much stuff. I mean, it's kind of an obvious answer. I think it's the values. So whatever we do is driven by our values. So I've met a lot of, single mums, and there's a lot of stigma about single mums, and so they will buy the newest of every toy because they want the best for their kid. Whereas having too many toys stops kids from actually having the space to play. It's like that's kind of the irony of it. There was this woman once and she kept her son in a high chair for too long, like beyond his developmental milestones, because she didn't want to let him onto the floor because there was too much stuff on the floor. So too many things is, having lots of is not great for anybody.
Yeah. I guess we're aiming for just enough. Maybe less than just enough? No, we don't want that.
And you can have some choice. Do you know what I mean? There's something called the 70-30 rule, and they say 70% of the things in our home, and you could apply this to clothing or whatever, 70% of the things in our home we only use 30% of the time. And 30% of the things in our home we use 70% of the time. So, like, for example, if you think about all the clothes in your wardrobe, it'd be very unusual if you wore each of them the same amount of time. We have our favourites.
Yep. And the ball gowns.
And so because we have our favourites, then that's that 30% that we wear a lot more.
Yep.
And we all keep things for future use. People with hoarding disorder are no different to, say, myself, who doesn't have hoarding disorder. We all keep things for future use. We're all attached to things. Like that first little pot I made in pottery. People come in, I'm like, oh, look at this. I'll show you what I made. We have attachments to things. If you think about like the flag. So countries' flags, in most countries, it's illegal to burn the flag of that country. So a flag is material with ink on it. Essentially, that's what it is. But because we're humans, we put onto objects attachments and patriotism and all sorts of things. So to be attached to inanimate objects is just part of the human condition. You know, it's the reason there was that kerfuffle when was it a Kardashian wore that Marilyn Monroe dress.
Yeah.
And so now there's a committee to manage who gets to wear the dress. So it's an attachment to the iconography, is that the right word? For
iconic status.
Sure. For important objects that are deemed important.
Yeah. It's interesting. So you have mentioned a little bit about what hoarding is. It's a mental disorder. Could you explain a little bit more about what it is?
Sure. So in 2013, it was included in the DSM-5, so Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and it was the first time that it existed in its own right. So it is where the desire to, it's almost like a compulsion to keep acquiring things, that results in clutter around the home, which impinges on the use of the home, and the inability to discard. So I have a spare room. It's probably half full of stuff, but because it's a spare room, it doesn't impinge on the use of the property. It doesn't affect the safety. I can still have people in. My passageways are still fine. So it needs to have a negative impact on the use and the safety of the house. Generally, there's something called the clutter image rating scale. A series of pictures 1 to 9. 1 is a display home, 9 is to the roof. So if a house, most of the rooms in the house are at a number 5, then that can be deemed hoarding disorder. And it's interesting because sometimes I'll get a call, say, from someone in public housing going, oh my God, you know, this person's hoarding, and I'll get there and like there's a little bit of mess on the floor. So we all have our own standards for what is too much and what is kind of good enough.
So how does having too much stuff, how does, being a 5 in most rooms affect the actual organisation and the functionality of the house?
Well, I guess it's organised in its own way. It tends to get organised chronologically. You know, like the oldest things are at the bottom.
Makes sense, I guess.
And then the newest things are on top. Within rooms as well. So, I mean, it can affect, as I said before, like utilities. People maybe they can't access the kitchen. Maybe they're buying a lot of takeout. Maybe they're going to like those free places where you get meals because they can't access their kitchen quite often. Sometimes people have a storage unit and they're the bane of my existence, really. I'm like, don't get storage. It's like a money pit. So people will put things in storage going, I'll deal with it later, and then never get to it. I mean, it can affect, you know, any aspect, the emotional health, the physical health and well-being of anyone in the home. You can't find anything, so then people might have to go and buy replicas again. They're late on bills because they can't find a bill. Some people then go and gamble because they don't have money to pay the bills, or quite often there's a lot of family violence or conflict within hoarded homes. If there's there's 2 or more people in the home and they disagree about, well, I want to start using the laundry again. I'm sick of going to the laundromat to wash my clothes. I do know there was a woman in Sydney who her and her husband were both hoarders. And so that kind of like worked for them. So he reinforced like the ceiling of the house so that they could store more in the ceiling cavity.
That's, I don't know. It seems to me that this is my impression, so it's probably wrong, but it seems like something that would sort of creep up on you. It's not something you plan. And it seems like reinforcing is planning in some ways.
Oh, yeah, they'd run out of room. Mm-hmm. And there's this ceiling cavity. And it's got all this space up there. So it's wasted space. But they knew they had to reinforce it, otherwise everything would come crashing down on them as well. Often people store things under the house as well. Or if there's a block of units and they have a shared roof space.
They take over?
Yeah, so they go down to the furthest unit and start storing stuff. And the only reason that this person got discovered was that there was a fire. So all the other ceilings collapsed quicker because they had extra weight in it that wasn't of their belongings.
Do they get in extra trouble, I guess? Were they liable for it or something?
I'm not sure the kind of insurance ramifications. It wasn't. I'm sure it didn't end well. People could have been hurt or injured or died from when the ceiling collapsed. Anything like that could have happened as well.
I think if I was the neighbour, I'd probably be quite annoyed.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would try to be understanding, but you'd also be in the heat of the moment very annoyed.
And, hoarding is a mental illness. However, the impact on others can be really awful.
So I guess hoarding isn't something that just affects the person who's suffering, but also everyone around them. So friends, family, I guess neighbours as well.
And I think quite often there's a push for friends or family to help. And it's interesting that, sometimes I'll get calls from family members and they're saying, I've tried and tried and tried. And I'm like, well, if they had schizophrenia, do you think that you would be able to help them or fix them? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, this is exactly the same. Just because hoarding is that one of the rare mental illnesses that has such a physical manifestation of ill health. Like if I have too much stuff, generally, it's quite easy just to get rid of it. So people think that if you've got too much stuff, helping means just taking stuff away. Sometimes I get calls from social workers or OTs at hospitals and they'll say, we've got an older person here. They've had a fall. While they're in hospital, can we pay you to go to their house and clear it out while they're in here? I'm like, well, that's theft for a start. Do you know what I mean? Can I go into your house and just take what I want and decide that you need that or you don't need that? Like those big clean outs. Sometimes people have a nervous breakdown afterwards. People have been known to also die by suicide. It's that traumatic event, having someone just clear out your place.
I mean, I would find it such a violation if someone came to my house, yet alone if they took all the things that I love the most, that I have, I guess, attachment to.
Absolutely.
I'd be devastated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think, what can family and friends do to help people?
I think avoid talking about the hoarding, avoid confronting people about it, reading up on what hoarding disorder is as well. It's a mental illness, and the stuff is just a symptom. Like you could clean out someone's house, and I guarantee you, because it means so much to them, they will reacquire at a much more furious rate because you haven't solved the problem. The problem is the mental illness. Sometimes people will say to me, when I first meet someone, do you want to have a look at tour around their house? I know. Like it's the person that I'm interested in. It's not how many rooms and how full they are.
Yeah. Okay. What are some myths about hoarding? You mentioned before about the TV shows.
Oh, those TV shows. The myths are it gets solved really quickly. Mm-hmm. You just need other people to take over, and other people know better. Myths are, oh, it's just junk. If you and I were to talk about, say, the 10 most important things to us, that's how people with hoarding disorder feel about all of their things. Mm-hmm. So asking them to decide what to get rid of is really difficult. Often they've been through trauma, which affects decision making. There's often with hoarding disorder perfectionism, which kind of can sound like an oxymoron, but they're really worried about making a mistake. So if I see a cardigan on sale, I'll go, oh, I'll buy one. Mm-hmm. Whereas people with hoarding disorder, because they also tend to have trouble managing their feelings, I can buy one cardigan and go, oh, yay me, right? But they might think, oh, well, what if I can't get it again? And maybe my neighbour would like one, or I'll get some for someone's birthday and that I don't want to miss out. So then they buy all the cardigans, the 20 cardigans or whatever. So I think that inability, the difficulty, like the stuff represents, like it's a coping strategy. Mm-hmm. So you can't just take it all away.
Mm-hmm. So you said you mostly work with people and you're mostly interested in the people. Do you at any point start actually helping to get rid of stuff or, I mean, I guess is that the goal for you?
The goal for me, there's two. So the goal for me is around creating a living environment that's healthier and safer. Mm-hmm. So the first component of that is reducing what they're bringing in.
Okay.
Because there's no point getting rid of stuff if there's still more stuff coming in. So the safety stuff is the first point around smoke detectors and widening pathways and unblocking exits. Quite often exits are blocked. Mm-hmm. So creating, safer kind of homes. And if somebody has like a spare room, I don't really care if that's full. Do you know what I mean? Like if they don't need it, I'm concerned about their kitchen and how they're going to get out and the sources of ignition, fire risk, that sort of thing. So so that safety stuff, I mean, besides just sitting down and just going, hi, how are you? And like getting to know the person first, their safety, and then it's about what they would like their home to be like. So I do work with people that aren't voluntary. So there can be like people who Child Protection have said, you've got too much stuff. If you don't reduce the amount, we might take the kids away. Mm. That's a lot harder because they don't think that there's a problem. Like they lack insight into the illness. They think that they need it all. And so that's different because I'll say, look, I know you think that you need all this stuff and you don't understand why Child Protection's kind of paying me to come and kind of on your back about it all. Can we reduce the amount so that we all go away and kind of leave you alone? Because I get it's a real power imbalance but the children need to be safer. Occasionally I work in homes where there's animal hoarding as well. Yeah, it's a lot rarer, thank goodness. It's an awful illness.
What does that mean when it's when they're an animal hoarder?
So it means that they can't provide the conditions for which animals should be kept healthy. Mm-hmm. It tends to happen a lot more in country properties because there's a lot more space and you can hide it easier, but it certainly happens here in metropolitan Melbourne and metropolitan kind of anywhere in the world. It tends to be in city areas, more cats, dogs, birds, things like that, where the animals haven't been desexed, so then they're just breeding and breeding and breeding, and these are my babies, and if I let them go, no one else is going to love them like I do.
I mean, I certainly understand that. If I had a bunch of cats, I would not want to leave them either. But I understand that, yeah, then you have to have the right conditions for them. That's part of your duty, I guess, as a pet owner.
And they need the right amount of space, they need fresh air, they need vet care, they need food, access to water. So it's when those conditions aren't met and that's overcrowding.
In that case, would you remove the animals for their own safety?
Yeah, in that case, animal hoarding is a lot more difficult to deal with because we can't do it, well, generally you can't do it slowly because the animals are in such distress or pain. The RSPCA mostly deals with animal hoarding. I've worked with a few people, but it's a lot harder to deal with because, again, it's a psychological issue. And where do people go to get, there's not much education out there about where you can go to get psychological help for that attachment, that over-attachment disorder.
So where can you get the help then? Psychologists, or are there strategies that you can employ yourself?
Yeah, so there's psychologists, there's people like me.
Of course.
Yes, there's some really good books by Frost and Steckedy. There's some Lee Schuer in America. He's a peer worker, so he has or had hoarding disorder. He does a lot of work running groups. So group work's been found to be really good so people can come together and go, oh my God, we do the same thing. Quite often they've never met somebody who has the same disorder as they do. Yes, I mean, there's so little understanding about hoarding disorder as well, and people just think, oh, they're just lazy or they're poor, and that's why they do it.
So where do you recommend people find information? Just the internet?
Well, the internet can be a source of good and evil, can't it? So a GP should be able to refer somebody to a psychological service. They should be able to. Not all doctors know.
Maybe try a few if the first one doesn't help.
Maybe try a few. Yes, exactly.
And are there any strategies that, say I know someone who is displaying hoarding behaviour, if I'm trying to work my way up to, getting them to see someone, or what are some strategies I can use to help them initially?
So what I say quite often to people who refer is just say, so I can meet the person anywhere, because quite often they don't want to let me in their house. So we'll make it a library, a park, McDonald's, like I don't really care where it is, maybe a neighbour's house. I've had that happen before as well. And if you can just agree to meet me for 10 minutes. And so usually because people feel like, oh, okay, it's just 10 minutes and I can leave, or she will leave as soon as I request it, they can kind of do that. It doesn't have to be, and so to try and take the pressure off, it means that I'm going to come in and remove all of your stuff. So just meet me and see what you think about what I've got to say. I mean, people can go to my website as well, but the best practice is certainly that slowly approach, and that people will be in control the whole time. I don't touch anything in someone's house without their permission. They are going to make all the decisions. My role is to assist them to make those decisions by using those values, because obviously generally I'm not in their home unless they want something to be different. Mm-hmm. So we can talk about, okay, so how do we get it different? What are your priorities? So if their priorities are their children's artwork, great, let's set up, and they'll go, I want all that bookcase there to be full of my children's artwork. Great. So let's get the tubs. And you can have 20 tubs on that bookshelf. I don't care, because that's fulfilling their want to feel connected to their children through their artwork. Great.
And then the rest of it, I guess, is less, they're okay with the rest of it?
Well, yeah, we're trying to introduce a sliding scale of attachment.
Yep.
So the children's artwork is the most precious thing. Mm-hmm. Whereas, newspapers or catalogues from 5 years ago, when you look at it like that, mm-hmm. given that I say to people, you can't make your house bigger. So let's pick a size of a space, like a bookcase. You can't make it bigger. So how are you going to decide what gets prioritised to have that precious space in your bookcase?
And I guess once you've demonstrated that you are willing to work with them and not against them, and that you have, I guess, their best interests, then they're happy, to work with you a bit more?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Some people get into the process and their anxiety's too much, mm-hmm. And so, maybe they need a referral for a GP, or maybe they need to do some other stuff, or they're not quite ready, or an anniversary's coming up, mm-hmm. Particularly anniversaries of trauma. They might say, I can't do this at the moment. I'll re-refer when I'm in a better space, or their physical health declines.
And then it's just impossible. Yeah, so you have very kindly brought in a lovely picture book. Should I hold it up to the camera? It looks really good. I'm looking forward to having a read of this later. So do you want to explain what it is? What's it about?
Sure. So I wrote this children's book in 2013. I think at the time I must have been working with a lot of families who had children, and thinking about the children, sometimes it's really, I can leave, but I'm, my head's still thinking a lot about the impact of hoarding on children. So I think at the time I was working in homes that had children who were really being impacted by the hoarding. And I thought, wonder how the children kind of understand it. So I thought a children's picture book would be easier than writing a book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was it?
Well, I haven't written the book yet, so so I did a short course at Writers Victoria, how to write a children's book. I found an illustrator, and so then I wrote it using, there's some typical things around, when a story starts, something bad happens, and mm-hmm. then how do the characters get through that bad thing? They try several different strategies. So essentially this is a book about a child in a hoarded home who, as most children do, are feeling a lot of pressure to keep the secret. There's something called doorbell dread, where you're not allowed to answer the door, they're not allowed to have people over. So this is the story of Dawn, who lives with her dad, and he develops hoarding disorder, and the story of how it's really important for children, regardless of what the issue is, to keep telling other adults that something at home isn't quite right. Mm-hmm. So it can be, mental health issues, or drug addiction, or sexual abuse, or family violence, whatever. So the moral of this story essentially is keep telling adults, because the first adult you tell may not believe you. Mm-hmm.
Or they might not realise what you're telling them, I guess.
Yes, yes. So at the time in 2013, this was the only book in English that explained hoarding disorder to kids. Mm-hmm. And I was just horrified. I'm like, and how can it be me who changes that as well? But it was me. I'm not sure that it's much different now. But
Have you heard from anyone who's read it and said that it really helped them?
Yeah, so I quite often give it to, when I'm working with family services or child protection, give it to the workers to use in groups where children have experienced family violence, where there might be hoarding as well. I think the people who buy it are kind of in the sector, or that they either grew up in hoarded homes and want to explain to their children why they can't go and visit their grandfather or grandmother. Yeah, I mean, I guess essentially it's a book about secrets and the impact of secrets when children are forced to keep secrets.
So I guess it talks about hoarding, but it's also, I guess, about you can apply it to a broader range of topics as well. Wow, it's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll definitely be finding some friends. I don't have any friends with kids, but one day they'll have kids. So is there anything that you do in your own home that you've sort of taken away from your experiences?
I think it's an interesting thing. I think my tolerance, sometimes I think it kind of works both ways. I'll have like 3 newspapers on the floor and go, oh my gosh, I'm turning into my job. Or, oh, those things on the floor, they're not too bad because what I'm used to is kind of up here. So I think sometimes it works for me and sometimes it kind of works against me as well. I think it just makes me really appreciate that I don't have hoarding disorder, and it's kind of amazing how the human brain can adapt to situations and what impact that has in all sorts of ways. Like all of a sudden I like pulling weeds, and when I'm at the supermarket, sometimes, like I've been in a really crowded house, sometimes when I'm at the supermarket, and it almost also was a former job of mine, but I'll start neatening things up on the shelf, right? Just for a moment of everything's in its place and it's just right. Okay, so there's a little bit of order in the world.
And I'm sure the staff at the supermarket just love, like, they're like, oh, perfect, great.
Yeah, and you just have to walk away because then someone else will come and ruin it. But
the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's good to find as well ways to express that desire for having a neatness around you in a way that's not harming anyone.
And it's achievable.
Yeah.
It's not onerous.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to watch for people organising things in supermarkets now.
I read, it was in the Age ages ago or something, there was a woman who had a cancer diagnosis, and she was talking about how she found herself in the car park at the supermarket just grabbing all the random trolleys and just putting them back in the trolley thing just for a moment of everything to be under control and all in the right place. I thought, I get you.
That totally makes sense, actually.
Doesn't it? Like,
yeah.
There's not much that is immediate gratification, and within our power, you know, we can control ourselves, but really life out there is going to do what it's going to do. So the small bits of power that can be used to make us feel better, that's not hurting anybody else, I think go for it, go pull some weeds.
Yes. We've also got some questions from the audience.
Great.
And we have sort of touched on some of them, but I will mention them just in case there's anything we've missed. So the first question is, what are the major causes of hoarding?
So there's genetics. Genetics can cause hoarding disorder. It would generally start in childhood or adolescence, unless there's a trauma or mental illness that happens later on in life. And when I say trauma, like it could be the fires, the floods. I mean, we haven't even gone on to COVID, the impact of COVID on our sense of safety and where that belongs. And people, it was awful on the news when they kept talking about people are hoarding toilet paper. I'm like, they're not hoarding it. It's not hoarding. Like, that word gets used in so many inappropriate contexts. So someone might lose their job, and that can be enough of a jolt to their system and their way of understanding the world. That can manifest itself, in hoarding disorder, especially if they've already got anxiety and depression.
So what are the symptoms of hoarding disorders?
So that almost compulsive acquiring, the amount of items in the home are filling up the home so the home can't be used for the intended purpose, difficulty letting go. And I would also say attachment to things more than people. Attachment to things is very safe. Like, they're not going to hurt you, they're not going to leave you, they're not going to bash you. Whereas the outside world, who knows? So when things start to become more valuable than relationships with humans.
I guess if you're not letting people into your house and sort of damaging the relationship there to keep all your things, that's an issue.
Well, it can be an issue because then it's a safe attachment. It's probably safer than friendships, do you know what I mean? Like, there's a real logic to it. They're not going to leave you. But it's not the healthiest because then you become isolated and all the other 100 ramifications of hoarding disorder.
So our third question, is hoarding related to laziness?
No, not at all.
And I think we have discussed that already, but I thought it was an interesting question because it shows what people are thinking about hoarding, I guess.
Yeah, and it's one of those myths that it's just that people are lazy, that's why they don't get rid of stuff, or that's why they don't clean up. Like, hoarding disorder affects people's cognition in order to be able to make a decision. It's hard to decide what to throw out. I mean, that's just the kind of tip of the iceberg that comes with it, but it's really difficult.
Yep. Does hoarding get worse with age?
Yes. So it's a chronic condition and it's also degenerative. So and some people that I work with, they're not going to ever stop hoarding. So then my only goal, I mean, it's still quite important, is to make their home safer. So if the worst thing happens, they've got much more of a chance of making it out alive. But that making it safer can take months.
Wow. I guess, and then you worry about what's going to happen if something happens when you're in the process.
Well, yes. I mean, I guess also, we're lucky in Melbourne that Victoria, so Fire Rescue Victoria have a hoarding notification system. So any house that has a 5 or above on that clutter image rating scale, anybody can contact the fire brigade and put them on the notification system. So that notification system records their address, is it a 5 or above on the clutter image rating, and is there a working smoke detector? So if those 3 things are met, then the property address gets put on the system. If there's a fire at that house, and where possible, 2 to 3 times as many fire trucks get sent out there.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, I think it's such a good idea that you obviously want to be prepared for whatever you're tackling.
Yeah, and it's also the health and safety for the fire brigade people. It's the neighbours. It's much more likely the fire will get out of control a lot quicker. It's duty of care as well. I like sleeping at night, so I want to put my own house on there. Like, who doesn't want more fire trucks rocking up? I think it's a great idea.
But don't you have to pay for fire trucks if you call them out?
I don't think so. Maybe it's insurance.
I thought...
Don't ruin my fantasy that I want more fire trucks rocking up at my house.
I think maybe it's different countries. You know, we read things on the internet and you realise it's for America or something instead of Australia.
Maybe it's a house insurance thing.
Maybe. I don't know. I'll look this up. What do people do if they live with someone who is showing signs of having a hoarding disorder?
I guess gently broaching the subject and seeing if people will get kind of psychological assistance. You can also put in like boundaries around, okay, so you're showing it in, so clearly you want to collect electronics. You can have this room here for the electronics. But no, you can't take, I don't want you to take over any more space. So you can negotiate. Doesn't have to be the end of a relationship or conflict, or it just depends on, you know, or you agree to build another shed, you know, in the backyard. If there's space, okay, we'll build another shed. So some people don't ever develop like full-blown hoarding disorder. It can just be, it doesn't, you know, have to turn into those horrible scenes like you see on the TV.
The next question sort of related. What's the boundary? What's the difference between sort of being a collector and treasuring things and being a hoarder?
So having hoarding disorder generally means that things aren't organised, they're not put on display. Collectors tend to take pride in their collection. It might be on display. They might have a garage full of, you know, matchbox cars and trucks, and I've seen amazing collections in my time. And it generally doesn't get in their way of their day-to-day functioning or the use of the property. That's for collecting, whereas hoarding can do that.
Yeah, okay. Great. That's all of our audience questions. And that's also the end of my questions for today. So if people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
So www.thecrowdedhouse.net.au, that's my website, and it's got email there as well as my contact details.
And if people want to buy your book?
Same place.
Same place? Great. Perfect. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I've learned so much. And it was really great to... I don't know, learn so much. It's very fascinating. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Room by Room, produced by the Home Organisation Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes like this from across 10 life management perspectives can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, and any other podcasting apps available on your smart devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, sharing, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people to find it so we can grow and continue to bring you quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, ho.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Gabriella Joustra, and thanks for tuning in.